Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode on the Vassal module. And I've had several people asking or expressing a little bit of frustration early on with using the module. So I wanted to do a little bit more in depth of how to navigate, in particular, the counters menu to find the counter you're looking for, but also show you some more things that you may come across pretty quickly while trying to learn the module. So you probably have noticed the counter already, and when we open that counters palette, there's a lot of tabs. There's a lot of locations where counters can be located, and it's pretty intuitive. If you read the headers, you've got your main menus, your main repositories of counters up here, and then depending on which tab you're under, which it starts by default with markers, you've got underneath that more subcategories, and then even within those, more categories. So I just kind of want to go through the logic of the organization of these counters briefly. Obviously, with the aircraft, those are pretty simple and self-explanatory to drag some counters out onto the map and mess with those. I've shown you before. There's built-in right-click menus with shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts, which make these much simpler. But for the markers, let's kind of walk through these real quick. So underneath markers, you have map markers, and these are markers that will not be going on the wing display. They are markers that are used on the map themselves, and these are the obvious ones that are used most often, like climb and dive, dogfights, bombing modifiers, things like that. But underneath the map, there is a second tab just for tally and vector. So if you're looking for a tally marker or a vector marker, those are located in another sub-tab of map markers. And there's also hits, which an initial player might confuse for marking losses. These are for targets on the map. So if you have a ground target that you're using advanced bombing rules and your bombers inflict hits, you use these hit markers right here. So map markers, you've got basic, tally vector, and hits. These are all markers that go on the map. They don't go on the wing display. And they, for the most part, these are stackable with the aircraft. So to illustrate, if I take this climb marker and drop it on that TBF squadron, you can see that it stacks. And for those of you maybe not super familiar with Vassal, a double click on a stack of counters will expand it so that you can select individual counters and move them out of a stack. Otherwise, if the stack of pieces is collapsed, which it is by default, and you just click and drag, you're going to drag that whole stack of pieces. So like the climb marker, the dive marker, and obviously the climb and dive are on the reverse side of each other. The slow marker, each of these you can see they're stackable with the aircraft. However, you'll notice that with the bombing marker, bombing marker as well, the defense modifier though, you'll notice it's not stackable. So Al, when he designed this module, did a very helpful thing, and he made the correct markers that are needed for indicating squadron status and stuff on the map for aircraft to make them stackable with the aircraft, whereas the defense is stackable with targets. And I'll just drag a target out here so you can see this. So here's a ground target. This defense modifier is stackable. It's a different layer, to use the Vassal terminology. The same layer with the heavy flak unit, but this stack of counters, all stuff relevant for marking squadron information, is not. So you can see that as I move this stack of units, it's not stacking with the pieces, and that's very helpful for, especially for ground strafers coming in. You might actually stack them up on top of targets, and then when you try to drag them off again, you may inadvertently drag another counter with it that got absorbed into the stack. But by stacking targets with the specific markers, by layering with the target markers with the markers appropriate to them, you don't worry about that. And the same is true for like this barrage marker. A barrage is in this square, let's say, and then this squadron, you notice it doesn't stack with it because this is on a different layer from the squadron. So that's a very helpful tool that's built in. But anyways, back to markers. You got your basic map markers, your tally, your vector, and these need to be filled in as you bring them in. So it's just got a generic ID. You can right-click, select ID, or do Control-I to bring up this menu where you can type the squadron ID. And then with the hits, a lot of these, and you can pick the specific one you want, but you notice these are also stackable with the target. They're not stackable with the squadron because these aren't used to track status with the squadron, but for targets. And you can right click and increase these rather than have to come in here and pick. You can just right click, select, or use Control+X to increase or Z to decrease. Helpful stuff there. Okay, so those are basic markers. Again, these don't go on the wing display. Let's go over to the wing display submenu of markers. And these are all the things that you put on the wing displays themselves. So I'm going to pop open a wing display here so that we can demonstrate. So obviously, the first submenu of wing display, you've got your ID markers, and there's some extra features in here like type. You'll notice right here is not on the physical game components, but this is a nice feature so that if you're dealing with a variant, let's say, you can change this to say this is, for like the Hurricanes or something. This is the Mark II-A Hurricane or something along those lines, so that you know that it's a variant that's specified in the scenario order of battle that uses different stats. It's just a helpful little feature if you want to use it. And obviously, we can all of these counters that pertain to an ID value for a squadron or something, you can just hit the Control-I to bring up the different things. And then obviously, these markers have a unalert and alerted side. But then on the wing display, so you got your ID markers, and then your mission markers, self-explanatory there, but they do cycle through if you want to. Bring one out here, you can cycle through them with Control-X. I often find it's a little more difficult. Oops, I accidentally missed the one I want. I mean, you can just come in here and pick the one you want. And just a helpful tip, what I always like to do is if I'm dealing with, say, an escort squadron that becomes a sweep, I always like to put a sweep marker on top of the escort marker just to indicate that this is a squadron that originally was an escort squadron that could reform as an escort later in the game. And you probably have a different, maybe thing that you like to do to indicate those, but in both physical game and with Vassal, it's an easy thing to do is just stack these markers if it helps you remember certain things. Then you've got stores over here. So these are all the things that would be carried, the ordnance carried by the aircraft. Then you've got quality markers. And then here again, this might be a little, some people have a hard time finding the experts. But if you click on quality, here you'll find basic quality markers. So like whether it's veteran or green, whether it uses loose or rigid doctrine for some of those earlier scenarios. And then like a generic wing leader for wing leader formations. But for experts, there's a different tab underneath quality. So quality and then experts, and then you've got them all laid out by which volume they appear in. So all your experts that came in victories, supremacy, and you may be thinking, well, there's more than that. Well, there are. You got to bring them out here, and then you can use the Control X, or as a random feature, you can plop down. It'll select a random one, or you can just manually hit Control X or Z to cycle through all the different experts. And then here's your combined expert wing leader markers here as well. And then for C3I29, wing leader blitz, wing leader eagle, the different experts that appear. And those expansions are all right here. All right, so these are all things, again, that go on the wing display. And again, here's combat. These are your combat markers, the ones that pertain to combat results, like your ammo markers, disruption, stragglers, and losses. And again, with the losses, these can increment. If you get a second loss, you don't have to drag a second one out here if you don't want to. Rather, you can just do the whole Control X to increase the number of losses, and it keeps the ADC, maybe the wing display, a little less cluttered. But obviously, it does tank out at 5 though. So if you need to indicate 6 losses, which that's pretty rare, you just drag another one out here and plop it down. You can stack these with each other or overlay them just slightly, or stack them on top. And then your other display markers here, you can use some RadioNet markers to indicate gyro. And these pieces have not really come out in the physical game yet. They will in Legends. Legends will have these markers in them when it releases. But if you want to mark what RadioNet squadrons are on, this is an easy thing you can do to bring these out and to label them differently. This is RadioNet A, for example. You can put that with all the different squadrons that are on that RadioNet, and flip them to show if they're cluttered. So yeah, those are all your wing display markers. Speaking of RadioNets, I'll show you a little tip that I like to use to indicate RadioNets that pertains only to Vassal. You can't do this in the physical game. So these markers will be helpful in the physical game. In the Vassal module, though, if we bring a squadron marker on here, I'll bring Hurricane on. Let's say this is going to be on RadioNet Able. I can use these markers, or what I like to do is use the built-in label action for a squadron and put my RadioNets here. So I can say Able and then say GCI 4. So this is Able, and the scenario notes specify that and say that it's on GCI, and the GCI value is 4. I like to label the squadron markers, so as they're out here on the map, I don't have to open up the wing display to see if they're on a RadioNet, who they share a RadioNet with, and if they need to try to change their vector or something, I've got the GCI value right there. So that's just a little tip that may aid with that feature. But for the physical game, these RadioNet markers are going to be helpful that come in Legends. Okay, so back to markers. We've got our wing display markers. So again, map, things that go on the map, basic tally, vectors, and hits. And you've got wing display, all the different tabs here for things that go on the wing display. Don't forget, if you're looking for experts, they're a little different sub-tab than the basic stuff here. And you got an environmental tab. Environmental tab are all the things for weather, the sun. Now notice that, and it's kind of hard to see on your screen, but there's kind of grayed out text on the counters that says that you need to press Alt and then click to select these pieces, and that's once they're placed. So if I bring out some broken clouds, for example, and drag them out here, even after I drag them highlighted, I can move them around just fine. But as soon as I select them, if I want to go back and click on them, you notice that they don't. I'm clicking away, but I can't select those, and that's helpful for not accidentally bumping them or moving them while you're dragging other pieces. And notice that they're not stackable with the squadron. Again, I'm thankful that Al made these layers in here. It makes it so much easier. But if you need to go back and move clouds after you've already placed them or delete them, you want to press the Alt key and then select, and then you can highlight them, which allows you to move them. So you can change them here as well with given things to change them, cycle through the different layers of cloud. Same with the sun. Put the sun marker on here. You're not going to be able to click it by accident. You have to Alt click it. And if you've got multiple clouds and things that you need to delete all at once, you can just press Alt and then drag a box, and that's how you select them all. Control D or right click D to delete them, or whatever you need to do. So those are your environmental markers. Then you've got your targets. We kind of went over those when we were talking about these, but you've got flak, ships, which are all organized nicely into their types. And I'll tell you, this is so much easier to use in the physical game because it takes me a long time to go through the many, many targets that are now available to find the specific ones. And a lot of the counters in the physical game, targets, you've got like a flak unit on the back side and a ship on the front, and you're trying to flip through all of them, try to figure out where that target is you're looking for. Now, this makes it pretty easy to find the precise one you need. So flak, ships, and ground units, and they're organized. The A to M ones here, and anything N to Z starts in this submenu. So there's your targets. And there is a built-in, and you may not use this. I like the hit markers, they stand out. But if you don't want to use those, there is a built-in, it's kind of hard to see here, but if I hover over the target, you see that there's a hits value in white text, which isn't on the physical counters, that allows you to increment the hits. So if I right click and select hits, then it pops up a dialog where I could say, oh, this has 4 hits on it. And then there it is. You can see the 4 hits value of 4. I personally like to use these. It looks cooler and it stands out better for how many hits are on squadron. But nice thing in there, I like how Al provided a lot of ways for you to minimize the number of counters and stuff out there so that the game is more easier to use, not less cluttered, which this is in my opinion, not a very cluttered game compared to most war games. There's not a boatload of counters that go out there or stacks, maybe only when a bunch of stuff starts piling up in a single square. But yeah, so then we've got a tab up here. You'll notice in the newest expansion Vassal modules, Legacy. So in the older version 1, or the first printings of the game, there were some counters which are outdated or had values that have changed in the second release. And if you still want to use those, you can find them in the Legacy tab, which right now there's just Legacy targets. These are the ones that were not updated. They don't have the little star in the lower right-hand corner, which indicates use these with second edition. And then we got a fandom tab. These are fan-created content, things that they have made and submitted, and Mark went ahead and added those. Al added them to the Vassal module. And these are all the main tabs you're going to see. I've got some extras up here because I'm using a playtest. I'm helping to playtest for Legends and Supremacy. So things that are helpful for the playtesting are found there. So those aren't going to be with yours. Another thing I want to show you is this turn phase indicator here. When you launch the game, it may be separate. You may notice it's a separate box. If you click turn, it pops up this little box, and you can cycle through the different phases, and then auto increments to turn 2, and that way you don't have to use this turn marker right here to indicate the turn, which you can. That's how you do it in the base game, but in the Vassal module, you can just use this. Several things with this. If you don't like it floating around, you can right click it. I'm sorry, not right click it. Yeah, right click the actual, right click here. And you can dock it. When you dock it, it's permanently here. You don't have to open up the box again and turn it off when you don't need it. But also, let's say if you're done with this scenario and you want to, within the same log file or something, start a new scenario, especially like in a campaign game, you don't have to go, start going all the way back to turn 1 or whatever. You can just right click here and set the turn. You can set it to turn 1, set it to the setup phase, click save, and then boom, you're back to turn 1 setup phase. Let's see, there's some nice, with the layers that Al has created, you can hide just the aircraft and the markers pertaining to the aircraft, but notice it keeps the targets out there. Again, those are the ones that layer together for the targets. You can hide those independently. Notice that the turn marker is also disappearing because these are all on the same layer, and then you can just hide all. So if you've got a bunch of aircraft or something in the targets, and rather than move everything off to try to find those targets that you're hiding, you can just hide the aircraft. And you need to do that. Back to the markers though, I stopped after map and wing display. There's also game markers. This is for your turn and your GCI setting. Again, you can use the GCI markers, but I like to put them on the squadrons themselves, like right there. So you can see that it's on GCI 4, and I don't need to have that marker on there. And there's markers for campaigns way over here. These go on the Blitz, the Eagles, and then ultimately when Legends is printed, but also the Origins. All those markers are here that you need. And there's a separate button over here for expansions. If you click this, you'll see your maps for the campaigns located here. Okay, well, I want to cut this short here soon, so I hope this was useful. I'm excited about this. This is a new feature which has not been made available on the Vassal site yet, but it's something that Al's been developing with, I think, several other guys. It's called C charts, and this is a really beautiful tool for, especially for log files, for automating the modifiers for different roles, or I should say, easily displaying those for log file purposes. And I'll probably have to do a whole different video on how to use these because these are pretty cool. I've been enjoying this so far. You've got your ADCs too. If you want to drag some ADCs out here, sometimes you'll find in Wing Leader that you only use a section of the map. Very rarely have I played a game where the whole board is being used. You can just stick ADCs in a part of the board that's not being used for easy use. Same with the charts. This is very helpful. I recommend using these. You get your sequence of play and all your play aids right here if you need to reference them. And I did create, when I made this extension module, all the weird little charts that are throughout the book that aren't on the play aids, I just stuck those all together into a chart here. In particular, the sun arcs I reference a lot. And the bombing results, how it affects flak, how it affects score, and also locations for placing barrage and direct flak, and how escorts set up, and the different indicators on the target, what they mean. I put all those right here so you can easily reference them, as well as the play aids for the different campaigns. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. There's a line of sight line if you want to trace a line to see if it goes through clouds or something like that. And yeah, I think I will leave it like that. I hope this was helpful. Please post any comments if there's aspects of the Vassal module that are confusing or you would like to see a demonstration of. And thanks for watching. I hope to post some new content soon, so keep a lookout. And Have a good one.